Hello, welcome everyone. So glad to have you today. I am Lindsay Schulten. I'm the Executive Director for the Oregon League of Conservation Voters. We're gonna jump right in very soon and I'll introduce our special guest, but a few kind of housekeeping things. I think you guys all know the deal with Zoom, but I think we have a couple of those first up. So you can use subtitles. Click on live transcript at the bottom and then show subtitle. You can also change the font for those subtitles. And then we're also gonna show the agenda, which is a lot of time with Senator Merkley, answering all your questions and hearing from him. But before we jump into that, I'm gonna pass it over to Gordon Robinson from OLCV for our land acknowledgement.
Thanks, Lindsay. The Oregon League of Conservation Voters works to protect people and places on the ancestral lands of the indigenous communities who built homes, economies, and trading routes across the land that we now call Oregon. We would like to honor and acknowledge Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes who have stewarded these lands since time immemorial. The Klamath tribe of the Southern Oregon Plateau, the Burns Paiute of the High Desert East, the Coquille of Southern Oregon's coastal forests, the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde in the Northern Coast Range, the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua in the Southern Oregon foothills, the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla in the Blue Mountains, the Confederated Tribes of Siletz in Oregon's northern rainforests, the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw on the wind-blown southern coast, and the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs on the sunny eastern slopes of the Oregon Cascades. And we would like to recognize all the other indigenous communities who have not been federally recognized. Oregon was built on broken treaties. The lasting effects of federal and state policies, both past and present, have put Native Americans at a disadvantage for hundreds of years. It is on all of us, whether we are descendants of colonizers or inhabitants of stolen land, to re-educate ourselves and each other. Together, we have the responsibility to push past recognition and demand land repatriation and reparations to sovereign tribal nations and indigenous people across the state. OLCV aims to work in partnership with tribes to further this endeavor of land repatriation and reparations. Back to you, Lindsay.
Thank you, Gordon. So we're gonna get to the reason everyone's here, and that is to chat with Senator Merkley, a climate champion through and through, with decades of leadership on the environment, and an unbelievable lifetime LCV score of 99%. I also want to just add thank you so much, Senator, for your leadership on opposing the GTN Express pipeline, which unfortunately we got bad news about last week with the FERC approval. Would love to, kick it off and hear more from you on that, and any other opening things you want to share. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Lindsay. Can you hear me now?
Yep, sound great.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to join the town hall. Your passionate and capable advocacy is essential for every environmental step forward that we're able to take. Makes such a powerful difference. There are a bunch of topics I just want to hit right at the beginning and then turn it over to your questions. Let's start with the Owyhee Canyonlands.
Yeah.
What I suspect may be a top priority or top 3 priority for you all.
Yes.
Senator Wyden's the lead on this, and his team has worked so hard with stakeholders like yourselves, stakeholders in the community, for years of dialogue and strategy to find a collaborative path forward. And we've made a lot of progress. 1.1 million acres of federal lands in the Owyhee Canyonlands and Owyhee River. It's a national treasure, one that too few Oregonians have witnessed. It's fish and wildlife and sage grouse, lands that are sacred to native tribes. And we also know that such lands can be damaged if they're not protected from maluse or misuse or overuse. And so this is why it's a matter. I seeing that, we often talk about Hell's Canyon is Oregon's Grand Canyon. That's also a term that's being applied, if you will, to the Owyhee Canyonlands. It's visit both of Oregon's Grand Canyons because they're both magnificent. Let's find a way to get this bill forward. And it's really a double strategy as we have on a number of our wilderness bills. That is the possibility of a monument for a conversation and the possibility of legislation, and kind of realizing both have significant flexibility to accommodate the many stakeholder concerns and interests that have arisen and been put forward and been accommodated in the course of working on this bill for a long time. Second, I wanted to address pollinators. I'm deeply struck by the fact that when I was a kid and we would take a car drive, by the time I got to a gas station, the windshield would be covered. It's like, okay, son, get out and clean the windshield and scrub all those bugs off. And now you're, if there's one bug splattered, you're kind of, oh, what kind of bug that was. It's a whole different world. We really had an insect apocalypse. And it's, generally the result of increased development and increased use of pesticides. But flowering plants and insects go together, and they're very important. And the way we have more insects is to have more plants and be much more conscious about that. 75% of the world's flowering plants and 35% of the world's food crops depend on pollinators. I have focused on the monarch because over 30 years, we're down to less than 1% of the traditional number of monarchs. Many people think they've seen a monarch when they've seen any yellow butterfly or maybe yellow-orange butterfly, but it's really actually very rare. I encourage you all to take a picture if you see one, and so we can kind of track a little bit of their territory. We had one good year that took us back from we were down to 2,000 monarchs counted, 2,000. It's like
that's hard to fathom. 2000
just impossible to fathom. Fortunately, we had a great year. We had a rebound. When things go right, they go through 4 generations coming north. And if things go right in the first couple generations, they can expand very rapidly. But think about if we had pollinator plots along our highways, which I now have authorized an initial funding for. Think about if we had conservation easements where massive fields that would otherwise be under conservation easements, but unplanted, were planted with pollinators, pollinating flowers. Think about if we had a program where the flowers you buy in the local store, some of them are marked monarch safe, meaning pesticide free, because right now we have a big problem. If you want to plant a garden in your home, a butterfly garden, a pollinator garden, you may be planting plants that have so much pesticide on them they actually kill things. So having a pathway to actually be able to buy pesticide-free plants, make it a big profit center for the nursery industry, it'd be a big win-win. So those are all pieces. I've been holding monarch/pollinator conferences through the Interior Department because of my role as chair of the Interior Spending Committee. And it's been powerful to bring all these experts together and identify some of these key problems and what we could do about it. Third, I wanted to address the Inflation Reduction Act. The incentives that are in there are going to make a big difference in deployment of renewable energy. There's $369 billion in climate provisions. Oregon is going to see a significant amount of that funding. Think about us being about 1% of the country. So if you hear $369 billion, a good chance that $3.5 to $4 billion are going to come to Oregon in various ways. One of those is a program to plant and maintain trees, cool heat islands, expand access to nature. Another is for transit districts for low and no emission vehicles. I like the no emission vehicle side of that. Energy efficient improvements to help rural business owners and farmers lower energy costs, but they also means that when you lower your energy costs because you're consuming less energy, that means you need less electricity, and we have a better chance of renewable energy becoming the sole vision for how we generate electricity. That is a key goal of President Biden's, was to have 100% electricity be fossil free by 2035. To do that, we have to deploy some 3 billion solar panels. So 3 billion, take 1% of that, and you can see how much work we have to do to capture sun in Oregon. I like to think of it as the best fusion energy program. The sun is a fusion reactor, if you will, and we're capturing that energy at a distance and putting it to work. Every single thing we do has some impact. Obviously, if you have a solar panel on the ground, you're not going to have a plant in that same location. But one thing you can do is plant plants in between the solar panels. Well, we have a lot of work to do on every front, on our buildings, certainly on our transportation, and certainly in our generation of electricity, certainly in our homes, eliminating fossil gas in favor of electricity. If you want to kind of capture what our challenges, think of this phrase: electrify everything with renewable integrated energy. And the acronym is ERIE.
Ooh.
Maybe
Well,
not,
good acronym.
maybe it's a little bit weird, but the point is, if we electrify everything with renewable energy, we will have done the biggest thing humanity can do to change the direction we're on. And you would think after all this discussion, all this effort, that somehow we're making progress on climate, and we are not. And one of the myths is that somehow fossil gas is better than coal. It is better for particulates, for what we breathe into our lungs, but not in terms of climate. If you have just a 0.2% leakage in a gas pipe system, and all of them are way above that, it's equal in its impact to coal. So there it is. So that is not an answer. Fossil gas is not an answer. The GTN Express, we had 2 governors. We had 3 attorney generals. We had 6 US senators. And I had multiple conversations with the White House. We had multiple letters, and the White House would not get involved. They said, we don't lobby the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And this, because it's increasing the pressure in the pipeline. I mean, most people in Oregon, Washington didn't know anything about it. I do think we have to find a better way to create a popular megaphone in situations where you can't have protesters stand in front of a pipeline, right? It was just a very hard thing to do. And I've been thinking a lot about that, about better ways to create citizen engagement. We need groups like yourselves to be involved in that. Here is the situation. The IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, it's powerful, but right now it's part of all the above, including the administration greenlighting fossil project after fossil project. This is 100% unacceptable. Yeah. You cannot kind of just deploy solar panels and think that we're going to get to the right place. And by the way, our influence in the world is very weak, because right now, after we go to a country and say, won't you have a 2035 goal? Won't you have a 2050 goal? And they say, yes, we will do that. We will do our part. We'll have those goals. Those are mirages on the horizon. I mean, the real fact is, when we leave, they say, there's America producing more oil than any other country, producing more fossil gas than any other country, pretending fossil gas is better than our coal, which we know it's not. And they're just green-lighted the Willow project on the North Slope, and they just green-lighted a bunch of LNG, or liquid fossil gas, LFG facilities. They just green-lighted more drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. They just green-lighted the Mountain Valley Pipeline. Man, don't they think they're proud coming around the world and saying that, that we partner, we can get this done. If every country kind of does the mirage of a future goal and doesn't make decisions right now to stop producing more fossil fuel infrastructure, then we're toast. And also at the federal level, what we see is very difficult to have action. The bill we passed, the Inflation Reduction Act, that was done with votes from only one side of the aisle. We have completely lost the climate champions from the other side of the aisle. And here's why. Money corrupts politics. What you have is a fossil fuel industry making $300 billion in net profits a year in America. If they invest 1% of that in politics, that's $3 billion. They basically change the views of a whole lot of people, or change who is elected in a whole lot of districts. And seeing that, the party that gets most of those donations has decided to basically sign off wholeheartedly. So McCain died. Others who were champions on like this, like Mitt Romney and Lindsey Graham, have gone silent. Others have bailed out completely. Others, like Ron Johnson, completely advocate massive myths. He was just in committee yesterday when I was holding a hearing, talking about how 2 Nobel laureates say that the climate change is all a big farce and it's not real and there's no real need to address it. And it's been signed by 1,000 other scientists, probably 1,000 scientists working in the fossil fuel industry. But the point is that we have a challenge that we in grassroots manner have to overcome. The powerful do have lobbyists and they have campaign donations and they have dark money donations. We have grassroots America. We have truth tellers like yourselves. We have organizers like yourselves. You are so incredibly important in that regard. And so be thinking about how we're going to possibly deploy our share, our 1%, if you will, of those 3 billion solar panels between now and 2035. And 2 more things. Plastics are a fossil gas product. They produce damage when the gas is taken out of the ground and the methane leaks into the air. It produces damage when they make the plastics, put a lot of carbon in. It produces more damage when it's burned, buried, or borne out to sea. We just had a fellow testify today in my hearing. He had the guts of a camel that he'd brought back from Kuwait, and it was about 3 feet long wad of plastic bags, about 2 feet in diameter. I'm sure we're going to put it on Instagram. And, of course, the camel died, and he found skeleton after skeleton with these big, massive leftover compacted wads of plastic bags, because our wildlife, they know how to handle cellulose because they've eaten leaves or branches or whatever, and you never see a gut full of wooden branches. But they haven't evolved to know that plastic bags are not food, and they think it is, and maybe it has good smells too, and it's a killer. We see it in the seas all the time, but I was fascinated to hear that it is a problem for land animals as well, because I was unfamiliar with that. With the challenge to move things in the Senate, with the 41 vote veto in the Senate, the challenges in the House, it means that a lot of the actions at the state level. So again, all of you become so important in this effort. And one of the challenges you face, so you had a number of accomplishments in the last session, is the self-censoring of the legislature because of the walkouts. And so I really want to emphasize that every organization that wants to see good policy for the future, whether it's reproductive rights or it's other civil rights for LGBT community, environmental community, our labor community, all have to come together and establish an agenda to pass another referral that will fix the Constitution, so that if there are a number of days where the legislature cannot function because it does not have a supermajority quorum, the quorum becomes a quorum of Article 1 of the US Constitution, the gold standard, a simple majority, as long as everyone's been notified in a responsible fashion. And if we don't do that, so much of the work you want to accomplish will be unable to accomplish, because the fossil fuel world will be urging and getting citizens in a variety of districts to continue to drive walkouts, regardless of whether people can keep their jobs. So that was my list of things I just had to talk a little bit about. Let's turn it back to you all.
That was fantastic. What a great way to start us off. With you on all of those things. On the last one, absolutely there. We can't get anything done on climate if these walkouts continue, anything significant at least, which we need to do. So we're gonna toss it to some questions now. And I should also mention who's on deck so you can get prepared, because we'll have you come on camera and get to ask your question directly. So we do have Clark Brockman first, and then we're going to go to Metzen Rodriguez. So for Clark, if you're ready, we'll hand it over to you.
Hello.
Hello there, Clark. Greetings.
Thank you for your time today, Senator Merkley. My name is Clark Brockman. I live in Northeast Portland, and I'm an architect focused on climate policy and advocacy, both nationally and regionally. My question for you today is, are there things that you and the Senate as a whole can do to help all of the affected federal agencies deploy and publicize the available funding from the IRA, the BIL, and the CHIPS Act? I know there's a lot happening because of the things I'm involved in, but I'm not hearing about it in the commercial or the public sphere. And I'm concerned that we in the Pacific Northwest are going to leave monies on the table.
Clark, great point. My team's goal is that we get as big a share of those federal funds as possible to Oregon. And so what we're doing, as we get notice from the federal agencies, we proceed to distribute those notices through email. We put them into a quarterly grant newsletter. We work closely with the state agencies, the counties, the cities, and the tribes to ensure they know about the funding opportunities as they unfold. The state of Oregon is also publicizing them. For example, the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Department has a public tracking system for opportunities for funds. It is a huge morass of opportunities, which is just kind of the beautiful and terrible at the same time, that there are so many programs that people can access, but then it's like, oh my goodness, how do I get started? What grant should I write? What do I need to do this? And every single one of them has a different pathway that's laid out. So it's a continuous education process, and really almost like you take small towns, it's almost impossible. So they call us up, they call up my field team. Stacey Jochimson is the head of the field team. And they say, is there anything in that whole thing that we might apply for? So we search through, we try to pull up a few of the best opportunities and say, here are a couple, do any of those really fit? And then a weigh in favor, write letters in support of their grant applications and so forth. One of the things also, there is a conservation open house as another way to roll through. And just yesterday, Fish and Wildlife did that. So that was another way to try to publicize. They're just continually new programs getting rolled out, and it's a morass, and it requires a high level of attention, but we're just trying to find every possible way we can make people aware of it and then help them apply.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And next we'll go to Metzen, and after that we're gonna go to Donna Champeau.
Hello, Senator. My name is Metzen Rodriguez. And
Hi,
I'm
greetings.
Hello. And I'm currently in Coos Bay, but I work for Unite Oregon as their climate and environmental justice policy coordinator. And don't mind the noise, they are doing construction at our house. But my question is, what are your thoughts surrounding electrification and building climate resilience?
Yeah, so electrification and building climate resilience are essential. Let me just talk about it in the course of starting with buildings and retrofits. Fossil gas furnaces, methane gas furnace, call them methane or fossil gas, not natural gas. That's a marketing term. If everyone starts saying fossil gas, it will really help in this conversation. They need to be taken out and replaced by heat pumps to heat buildings. Anything new needs to be put in with electric heat pump technology. One advantage that I hadn't thought about was that when you have a heat pump, it also provides you with air conditioning. And so Mary was so happy that suddenly we had air conditioning because we'd replaced our furnace with a heat pump. Second, heating water. There's at a minimum go to electric hot water heaters, but there's also heat pump water heaters that are even more efficient. So, and then think about the fact that every building, one of the biggest losses is the way it leaks energy. So having a test of a building, they do infrared imaging to see, where in the house is all the air leaking out. Okay, well, that requires some caulking or some new windows or this or that. It gives you a great idea of how to make a building from a house up to an office building better. And there is $90 million in the bipartisan infrastructure law to help cities and states and tribes and organizations implement stronger building codes for new construction or renovation. And so that's another piece of how the bill is trying to help move along faster, a process we all know would create a better energy future.
Thank you.
Great
Thank
question.
you, Madsen. Good to see you.
So before we go to Donna, we're gonna also call on deck Gretchen Valdido, and I apologize if I said your last name. Donna first.
Yeah. Hi, Senator Merkley. Thank you for being here, and you've heartened me and you've motivated me in your opening statement. My name is Donna Champeau, and my partner and I have a 160-acre farm in the Mid-Willamette Valley. I also serve on the Polk County Soil and Water Conservation District Board of Directors. On our farm, we are working hard to transition to methods of regenerative farming. And we're doing that to sequester carbon, to retain water, increase habitat, and decrease chemicals harmful to the environment. So with the reauthorization of the Farm Bill this year, we believe we have a chance to shift the US agricultural system from a climate problem to a climate solution. Do decision makers in Washington, D.C. understand the necessity and urgency to change the current dominant farming practices in the US? And will there be adequate support in the form of incentives for farmers to make these transitions to climate smart practices?
Well, I hope so, but realize the Farm Bill is driven by big ag operations, big corn, big soybeans, big wheat. And normally those organizations that have such power of the Farm Bill aren't too interested in things like organic farming. And certainly to go beyond that, regenerative farming as you are doing. A few years ago on the Ag Bill, I led the effort to create crop insurance for organic farming. Well, it took a lot of effort, but we did kind of put a fire under the Department of Ag to start establishing that to recognize the organic side of the world. I led another fight, which we lost, which was to allow GMO-free markings on food, but there was federal preemption eventually won out on that. But in terms of regenerative farming, for everyone who isn't familiar with the term, it's really the most sustainable version of how to care for the land. So thinking about pesticide-free and herbicide-free, think about how to make the soil far healthier. So I introduced the Soil Care Act. As climate chaos continues to make the West hotter and drier, it's important we do everything as farmers, ranchers, land stewards to have the tools to make the lands adaptable and resilient. And my bill would provide USDA personnel with resources to support farmers to implement healthy soil systems. So I'd say that's the thing I'm doing that's closest to being helpful. There may be good ideas coming from others as we consider the Farm Bill. Right now, we're in the midst of really not considering the Farm Bill. It's kind of been set aside because we're immersed in trying to keep the government open past November 17th and to pass as many of the spending bills as we can. But we'll be coming back to the Farm Bill. And so any other thoughts or ideas, Donna, that you have about how we can proceed and give advice to Senator Wyden and myself would be very helpful.
Great, I will.
Thank you, Donna. Before handing it to Gretchen, calling on deck Renee Windsor-White. But first to you, Gretchen. Oh, Gretchen, you can come on video if you're ready. There she is. Oh, you're muted. There you go.
There we go.
You're good.
Okay. I don't see my video. Can you see me?
Gretchen, we can see you and we can hear you. So
Okay,
thumbs up.
perfect. All right, great. Hi, Senator Merkley. My name is Gretchen Valdido, and I live in beautiful Bend. And I am a Sierra Club member leader, and along with OLCV, I was happy to hear you address Senator Wyden's bill SB 1890, which adds permanent protection to parts of the Owyhee Canyon lands. And that bill was introduced earlier this year. I know you addressed it when you first started speaking to us. So I am wondering if you can give us an update, a little more clarity on where it stands and what its passage might look like this year, or do you have a date? So anyway, I'm just looking for a little more clarity and color on when you think it might be possible to get this going.
So the next step is the markup in the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Senator Wyden serves on it. He's a former chair of it. He's the longest serving Democrat who is on the committee. He's no longer the chair because he took the chairmanship of finance, that is tax law. But he's certainly the most senior member, and it's a great place for him to be that is coming through his committee. So we'll see how the markup goes. The goal on this is you get bipartisan support, you get it through a committee, and then when the moment is right, and there's been a huge pile up of bills like this across the country, where there's something in almost every state, then there is a mega bill in which these are all put together, and everybody has a stake in passing it. If you try to do any one bill by itself on the floor, any one senator can force the Senate to take a month on it. It just can't happen. You try to get unanimous consent, some will object because they want their bill done. So this is you get it through a committee, and then a whole bunch of bills are done at once. My very first vote in the US Senate was on such a package of over 100 wilderness bills. And that was great. Oregon had 3 pieces in there, and the Senate passed it, and then the House failed to pass it. And then the House did some more work, passed it, and we finally got it together and got the whole package done. And that's what we'll be aiming for here. But the markup in the Senate is the next key moment, and I think that's next week.
Okay, great. That's good news. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, on deck, just so they're ready, Keely Wynn, but first I'll throw it to you, Renee.
Hi, thank you very much for being here, Senator Merkley, this afternoon and sharing your insights with us. My name is Renee Windsor-White. I live in Lebanon. I'm particularly interested in what the federal government is doing with our pollinators. Are there any specific programs that the federal government has in place or is planning to help and support honeybees and monarch butterflies, which you spoke to at the beginning? Thank you for your time.
I should be wearing my monarch pin right now. As I mentioned before, it's just kind of striking that in 2001 we were down to just 2,000 butterflies, 2,000 monarchs. We had the next year, 22, we had some 200,000, so that was an awesome increase, but a 100-fold increase. But then we had those late snows that came this year. And it's not really clear how each the 4 generations that go north, how it's been affected. So the counting is done when we're in the winter sites. And for the Western monarch, that is not Mexico, that is California. And I must say, I took a trip down there to visit, and it's really a powerful place to go. If any of you are thinking of taking a long weekend during the winter, it's worth going to the coastal sites. And the reason the overwintering is right on the coast is because of the ocean creates non-freezing temperatures, and to survive the winter they have to be in a non-freezing location. That's why those snowstorms were so dangerous coming when they did. Another problem is with climate change, the milkweed timing is sometimes getting out of sync with the first generation when the monarchs leave the coast and go inland. And if that first generation doesn't find milkweed, then it's a devastating loss. And thank goodness if that had happened in the 2021 spring or 2022 spring, then there might not be a Western monarch left. But we were fortunate. So in the bipartisan infrastructure law, I got authorized the Monarch and Pollinator Highway Act, And it is also funded at a very small amount of money. And I'm meeting with the transportation department. The whole idea is that clubs will adopt different plots of land along our north-south highways to provide pollinator pollinator plots, and maybe there'll be an acre. We're not sure what size, exactly how the team is going to unroll this. But we also want to make sure that the clubs that adopt these sections have access to monarch safe, that is pollinator safe plants to plant. I think it'd be a very cool thing for all kinds of clubs. Maybe it's a conservation club, maybe it's a garden club, maybe it's a Boy Scout, Girl Scout troop, maybe it's a school club, environmental club, or you know, any of the adult clubs, if you will, Rotary, for example. But that could be very helpful, but it probably won't be the type of acreage that we could get if we also have conservation easements in which significant amounts of land are planted deliberately in wildflowers and in milkweed. Again, milkweed for the caterpillars, pollinating plants for the adults, not just of monarchs, but the bees as well. I'm always struck by how many versions of bees there are. Like I kind of grew up thinking there were bumblebees and there are honeybees, and there's hundreds of versions in the wild. Many of them on the verge of losing them, but it's a combination of we have to have flowers and we have to be pesticide free. And if we do that, we plant a lot more, we're going to see a big rebound.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the information.
Thank you. And then we're gonna next. We got Keely. Keely, you're up next, and then after that we're gonna do Paul Engelmeyer. Go ahead, Keely.
Thank you so much for speaking with us. I'm Keely Wang, and I live in Happy Valley, Oregon. And I was wondering on specific initiatives or actions that you're promoting for environmental justice and equity, as well as how are you prioritizing youth and Indigenous communities? That's like my first set of questions. And then my second one is, what are measures that we're going after corporate polluters to take in accountability?
Okay, Keely, it's a pretty broad question, but let me take a shot at it. First, my subcommittee on the Environment and Public Works Committee, I renamed it to put environmental justice in the title. And my staff have been holding meetings with environmental justice advocates all year. One of the goals has been to stop the building of any new chemical plants or other plants that produce toxins in frontline communities. Because where do people want to build these? Well, they want to build them in the poorest communities that have the kind of the least spare time and resources to fight the siting. And so continuously, that happens, and we've really got the president on board in that regard. But this is all over the country. We also have communities who live near land that's being fracked, which destroys their groundwater. There's a fascinating video documentary called Gaslands, and people can put a match to their faucet and light their faucet on fire because of the amount of gas following fracking that has permeated the water system. And so you just think about what else damage that is doing. One specific campaign is standing with the Standing Rock Sioux to stop the Dakota Access pipeline. Another is to try to protect the NEPA laws, bedrock environmental law, which is the foundation for environmental justice, from erosion in any of the deals that are struck on appropriation bills, kind of out of public sight. Another is to greatly increase the funding for environmental justice programs. After I became chair of Interior, we went from $10 million a year to $100 million per year. And I want to also credit Nancy Pelosi on the House side as having pushed very hard for that. So that was a huge help. And we need to better support the resources for the Environmental Protection Agency. The one side of the aisle has worked to systematically starve them of funding so that they don't have staff to actually do the work. So those are a few points. In terms of holding big polluters accountable, I think that if you are in a town hall and you say who should pay the general population for the pollution they're suffering from, or the people who put the pollution into the community, people are unanimous. The people who create the pollution should pay for it. And by the way, that serves as a big discouragement from polluting in the first place. But it is an ongoing battle because those powerful organizations, they have lawyers and they have lobbyists and they have media campaigns to change how people think about issues. They have regular campaign donations. They have dark money campaign donations. So that's what we're up about or up against. And that's why we have to continuously organize and educate regular Americans in order to have a chance to resist what the world would look like if their version, that is the powerful polluters version of the world, was to go forward without us paying attention. Thanks, Keely.
All right, before we hand it to Paul, just on deck, Alejandro Carroll. Take it away, Paul.
All right, good. Thank you. I really appreciate this, Senator Merkley. My name is Paul Engelmeyer. I live on the Central Coast, and I've done conservation work dealing with, for over 30 years, dealing with salmon recovery issues, marbled murrelet issues, and now, of course, we have to deal with the climate crisis. You've touched on these issues in your earlier introductions, but I'd like to just bring them back again, because I'm a part of it and I think it's really a positive thing. And so 30 by 30, this conservation vision, it is truly a vision. Many of us are engaged in it. And I'd like to hear your position on that and what you're doing to advance it. Also, this issue of natural climate solutions. And that, of course, deals with protecting our forests and estuaries, blue carbon issues. The next issue, if I hope you can touch on, is beaver conservation as a climate adaptation strategy. And because, of course, as you're very aware, beaver conservation is linked directly to water quality, water quantity, and salmon recovery. And we think water quality, just so you're aware, 112,000 stream miles in Oregon, the most in the nation, are impaired and on the 303D list. I truly appreciate your conservation efforts during your years in office. And if you and your staff would like to discuss these issues more in depth with someone who's on the ground, I look forward to having a dialogue.
Well, Paul, thank you. And the 30 by 30, that's 30% of U.S. lands, freshwaters, and oceans by 2030 conserved to reverse the loss, the loss of natural lands and blunt the impact of climate chaos. There is one particular provision in the fiscal year 2024 funding bill you might be interested in, and it comes from a result of my 36 town halls where beaver advocates showed up after town hall. And so that's an example of great organizing and advocacy. And the result is language that's in the bill that says federal land managers are encouraged to work with state wildlife managers on beaver conservation to make planning decisions that recognize beavers' environmental and ecological benefits, to identify locations where restoration of their habitat may be most beneficial. And folks who came to the town halls could go on very effectively about the benefits of that natural restoration. And I was already pretty familiar with it in advance, but I didn't actually know that there was a beaver caucus in the state, in various parts of the state, all working together to try to advance that. But it's a key example of natural infrastructure being restored that has huge beneficial effects. I'm certainly happy for my team to meet with you, Paul, to think about what else we can do, what type of which pools of grant funds might be available to support beaver restoration, for example, or a community-initiated project in the future.
Well, if we're going to have a dialogue, I really look forward to it, because what you were talking about earlier, the Farm Bill, we look at that as a way to piggyback natural climate solution on some of those wetter areas and areas that can be a wetlands reserve enhancement program, as well as a beaver conservation program. So you're gelling these two issues that are inextricably linked.
One of the things we suffered a loss was the legislating Supreme Court, which in their decision said that the waters of the United States do not include waters unless there's a surface water connection. And anybody who has spent any time around water knows that water flows through groundwater and into our streams. And so very much the waters of the US are affected by systems that are not connected by surface water. But we have a Supreme Court that is now controlled on a very political way, and they're basically legislating instead of doing balls and strikes on the Constitution time after time. And this is one of the places we've taken a significant hit.
Well, this issue of beaver conservation, when I gave testimony to the Fish and Wildlife Commission, they posed a question to me of what kind of investments are we making in Oregon? And so I said to the commissioner, I will chase that down. $1.15 billion being spent to recover, to keep Oregon, which is dealing with riparian plantings, dealing with invasive species, in-stream projects to improve water quality and salmon recovery, $1.15 billion. And yet we are trapping a keystone species that's linked to 60 to 80 other species dependent on wetlands. So there's something that we can do, and it has to deal with trapping of this keystone species. It needs a policy change.
Thanks, Paul. On deck, we're going to have Cheyenne Holiday, but first we're going to go to Alejandro.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Alejandro Queral. I'm the Executive Director at Oregon Center for Public Policy. It's good to see you again, Senator Merkley. Thank you for your leadership, for being here today. My question is, as we know, Oregon sits in possibly the largest deposit of lithium in the world, right there in southern Oregon with the border of Nevada. But there are huge environmental, labor, and cultural or indigenous issues that need to be addressed before we move forward. Are you confident in the existing regulatory scheme will ensure these interests are protected? And if not, what can we do to ensure that they're protected from the interests of would-be profiteers?
Alejandro, the short answer is no, I'm not confident. We have ancient mining laws that are a big challenge in terms of the sorts of protections to do mining right. I agree with Bill McKibben when he says, listen, folks, if we're going to be able to pivot fast enough to renewable energy, we're going to need those critical minerals, and we can't be against mining them everywhere because without them, we can't make the pivot, and climate chaos runs out of control because of fossil fuels, ongoing pollution. But we have to do it in the most responsible way possible. And the deposit you're referring to is the one in southeastern Oregon, I believe, near McDermott, Nevada. It crosses state lines. There's absolutely environmental concerns there. There's cultural concerns there. The Jindalee project is still in the exploration phase, having drilled a whole series of holes and checking it out, but they have not proposed a mine yet. But I think there's a very good chance they will be, depending on the results of those test holes. I've asked my team, and they have toured the site with conservation groups, as well as with ranchers and others concerned about their livelihoods. So my team is very much aware of it. They've also met with the Fort McDermott, Paiute, and Shoshone tribes who have ancestral lands both in Oregon and in Nevada. So we're engaged on it, but it's important to be engaged because we have an 1872 mining law. And in various bills that Senator Wyden and I have introduced, we have protected parts of Oregon from mining, and Oregon itself has done work like banning the creek gold mining, the kind of where you're in the stream of the creek, creating great chaos while you're trying to extract flakes of gold. And one of my bills now is the North Fork of the Smith River. And there's huge support for that. And it's the big concern is mining done wrong can do massive damage, not just the North Fork, but the whole Smith River as it runs to the coast. Keep educating us. We're going to stay in contact with the environmental advocates and the tribal advocates and try to figure out, and by we, I'm talking about Senator Wyden and myself, teaming up to try to make sure that if a mine is proposed, that it's proposed under the type of most responsible regulations to do minimum damage. I will never say no damage because that's impossible. Everything we do has some damage, but this could be a nightmare, or maybe it could be a model for the mining done right. And we want the latter.
Thank you. Thank you for your leadership.
Thanks for the question. I think we have time for probably 2 questions, if that sounds okay to you, Senator, because we're getting close.
I'll try to shorten my responses.
You're doing great. No complaints. So we'll do Cheyenne, and then after that, our last question will probably be Dylan Hinson.
Hello, thank you so much for engaging with us today. My name is Cheyenne Holiday. I live in Gresham, Oregon, and I work as the advocacy manager at Verde. So my question is, water justice and water access are issues that have deeply complex environmental regulations and gaps that leave underrepresented communities with unsafe, underregulated, and oftentimes very expensive water access. For example, groundwater and domestic wells are severely underregulated, and this underregulation has a disproportionate impact on low-income and BIPOC communities in Oregon. How can we best advocate in the legislature for proper regulation and equitable access to water for all Oregonians?
You know, there are a couple of things from this last year I think about when I think about groundwater and wells. One is going to Malheur County and having the community leaders say, we would really like you to help with state regulation of our wells. And I nearly fell out of my seat because in the past, it's been very much keep government out of our business. We want to drill wherever we want. We want to take whatever water we can. We don't want to. And I said, I was just like, what has changed? And the answer was, we're losing 3 to 4 feet a year in groundwater. And if that doesn't end, we're all done because we can't. Water rights mean nothing if there's no water that you can afford to bring out of the ground, or there's no water there at all. You can maybe drill deeper for a while, but that eventually ends and your costs for pumping out of the ground go up and eventually it's all gone. And so they were looking for some sort of regulatory structure that requires the state. That is not a federal water law, state law, regulation, they're monitoring. So that's a huge opportunity for OLCV to be engaged in the process. The other thing I think about is going to a community that was affected because of a gravel mine being nearby, and their groundwater had resulted in concentrations. I'm trying to think what mineral it was right now, but I'm spacing on it. But anyway, it was corroding their pipes, producing kind of black water out of their faucets, and they were getting sick. And they were trying to get the state engaged to have the state actually do a serious investigation of the connection between the gravel mine and the sudden change in their water. And my team and I, as well, directly engaged with the state and said, please go out there and do a super thorough investigation and then help people figure out how they can get water that's safe to drink. Manganese, was that manganese? I think it was manganese. And then another community that I went to that has a really terrible nitrates. And the more I learned about it, been around there for in Morrow and Umatilla counties, really been facing that for 30 years with no action. So kind of, again, trying to gin up the state to take action on that. We got some federal funding to help out there. And that was good. $1.7 million to help the 2 counties get a better understanding of the problem and how to design a water system that would serve those families so that they were not on the groundwater, because you really can't fix the groundwater. But why were there too many nitrates? Well, it was, I think, a lot of the water that's used to process potatoes was then being used as irrigation water because it has nutrients in it. But then you get a rainfall and it washes out and it starts percolating into the ground here and there. And over time, you have the groundwater is polluted with nitrates. So the cleanup is extraordinarily difficult. So in the short term, it means trying to build out municipal supplies of water, piped water, and delivering bottled water, because you can't really kind of just filter it all out of the water at, say, when it comes into your house. Excuse me. I must be doing too much talking. Anyway, I know we have to get one more question in, but those water issues, it's a great opportunity to make an impact at the federal level. I'm trying to provide funds to help communities take these things on, but the regulation is largely a state issue.
Thank you.
And we are going to go to our last question. We'll keep it as quick as possible. I appreciate so much all your time, Senator. I will also say we got well over 200 questions submitted. We wanted to get through as many as we can, but obviously can only do so much with the time. But Dylan, why don't you close us out with the last question?
Awesome, thanks. And thank you, Senator, for being here today and also for passing the IRA. And so yeah, my question is specifically, having passed the IRA, we have a lot of new funding for new clean energy projects. But in order to rapidly implement those projects, currently there's a big permitting backlog. I know in the past, we've been supporting robust permitting, especially for dirty energy projects. But now, I guess, what are we going to do to support laws and policy that can help speed up the permitting process for those clean energy projects to get them implemented by our 2030 goals? And is there a bipartisan path this legislative cycle to pass those clean energy permitting reform?
So permitting reform is being widely discussed. You had following the Inflation Reduction Act, you had the side deal. That side deal, which I led the fight against, did pass on kind of its third try. We stopped it twice, but it did eventually pass. And it did weaken NEPA in a whole series of modest little ways about what it takes to, like, whether or not a company can basically do their own environmental analysis, like, for example. But the concern now is that there will be additional permitting reform under the kind of goal of getting renewable energy into the grid, which is essential, but that it will also knock down barriers to make more fossil projects be deployed faster, and so do the opposite of what we need to do. It does not matter how much renewables we do if we keep producing massive amounts of fossils. And the thing that haunts me are feedback loops, because at some point we have triggered a change that will continue kind of regardless of how much we cut back our own production of carbon dioxide. I'm talking about things like warmer temperatures producing thawing methane gas that is trapped in peat, or permafrost, or frozen in the bottom of lakes. And a picture that really scared me 2 years ago was a picture in the New York Times of a lake in the Arctic bubbling with thawing methane coming up out of the lake. And other feedback loops include warmer, longer summers producing more fires, which means forests, instead of storing more carbon, start releasing more carbon as they burn. Or the ice in the Arctic disappearing so that more sunlight hits the water, therefore it captures more heat, therefore it melts more ice, therefore less ice. And you have these cycles can combine in a really damaging fashion. All the more reason we have to move fast, and we have to absolutely tell our politicians at every level, including this presidential administration, that all the above will pave the road to climate oblivion, that it's completely unacceptable. And I'm just counting on really folks like yourselves and like the Sunrise Movement of younger folks. COVID did a kind of disrupted that enormously. It has to reemerge. We have to have incredible energy directed to our political leaders so they resist the siren call of massive money from the fossil fuel industry, re-electing them or causing them to silence themselves because they don't want to lose that support. So we did get $1 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act to federal agencies that were tasked with completing reviews and permits. And so that's good. We need to recognize that NEPA is often presented as the barrier, but it really isn't the barrier for getting things done. In fact, often it's the absence of staff to get the reviews done by the companies themselves that are required in order to be able to move forward more quickly. But the goal of the fossil world is to always say, oh no, it's NEPA that's slowing us down. If we undermined the permitting reforms, then we wouldn't have been able to have Oregon stop the Jordan Cove project, for example. And it was the first statewide and for a very long time, the only statewide elected in Oregon, what was saying the fossil gas project at Jordan Cove is a climate loser. And despite how much I want infrastructure for Jordan Coves, that's not the project we can support. We have to support projects that build the infrastructure that makes America better, not ones that destroy the planet. But state ability was very important in that effort to stop that. So we have the federal level. We also have the state level. We just lost the battle with FERC. Well, FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, on the Gas Transmission Northwest GTN Express to increase greatly the gas flows to that pipeline. There's supposed to be a need demonstrated. How can there be a need for more fossil gas when we're changing our heating and we're changing our hot water and we're trying to decrease our plastics, and we have a climate plan that will never be fulfilled if we magnify the gas in that pipeline, because that's equivalent to putting 640,000 fossil fuel cars on the road in our state. It's exactly the wrong direction to go, but FERC ignored all that. It's a corrupt, rigged system. And despite, as I mentioned before, that I worked to help line up the governors and attorney generals and all 6 West Coast senators against it, I couldn't get the administration involved because administration is doing all the above. And so I know I'm ranting on a soapbox here, but I can't stress how important it is, what little time we have to pivot, and that the electeds, including Democratic, my side of the aisle, blue electeds, have to hear about this all the time at every town hall, at every group that's thinking about organizing to assist in elections. So I better stop there, but we can't have a deal that the Republicans proposed, which was to do permitting reform that unleashed fossil fuels and destroys the Clean Water Act all at the same time. That's the sort of bargain that no one should back, but we're at risk of. By the way, I put on my Monarch pin. I don't know if you all can see that, just for the.
Yeah, I can see it. That's awesome. I want one of those.
Yeah, I know they're pretty cool.
Yeah. And now I also want to send you a photo I took of a butterfly in my backyard and see if it actually was a monarch. So.
All right. Great.
Thank you for the question, Dylan. Yeah, I will. I know we actually took more questions and we kind of ate into the end to give you closing statements, but if you have a minute, if you want to close us out, we're so grateful for all your leadership and your time today. So.
Well, I want to mention one more issue that I think you were planning to ask about, which was offshore wind.
Yep.
And I was really concerned that BOEM, which was set up really to do oil derricks in the Gulf of Mexico, really had no idea how to go about having a dialogue with the public in Oregon. And so they kept saying, well, we're holding listening sessions. Well, listening sessions, what is your plan? How are you going to avoid having a wind turbine array that interrupts crab or whiting or salmon or shrimp or any other stakeholders in the Oregon coast? And they kept saying, well, we're listening to everybody. Well, the point is that offshore wind could contribute to renewable energy, but it has to be done in partnership not in a hostile takeover. It's like you have a gymnasium full of people playing volleyball and someone walks in and says, sorry, I keep playing volleyball, but you know what? We're going to hold prison ball in the middle of the gymnasium at the same time. You're like, well, what? That, no, you can't, that's not a deconfliction. Boehm finally, after I gave the head of Boehm a very hard time, did provide a massive amount of information about the different tracking of the different fishing and crabbing and shrimping activities and what they thought might be a possible way to be deconflicted. But that's the sort of evidence they needed to provide up front to all those fishing, crabbing, shrimping communities in order to have that conversation. And I hope that's what they can do. There are folks who say, hey, we just need to get offshore wind turbines deployed next year. Well, I'll tell you this, the cost in the best estimates of offshore wind are somewhere north of 7 cents per kilowatt hour. Well, onshore solar is 2 cents. There's no market for offshore wind at this point in time. There may be in the future as the costs come down. And it could be a big complementary source of renewable energy to replace fossils. But please, Boehm, have an honest, transparent conversation with all of our stakeholders so we can end up with a win-win Oregon Way solution, not a war over coastal resources. That's my story.
Thank you for bringing it up because yeah, we ran out of time. That was literally the next one that I was hoping we were going to get to sneak in. So I appreciate you talking about that. So
I'll just close by thanking you all so much. Double down. We all have a limited arc in life of what we can do. Trying to manage human civilization in a way that doesn't destroy our natural beloved infrastructure on which we all ultimately depend is just a key and important, massively important undertaking. And you're all on the front line of doing that. And I thank you for it.
Well, we thank you. We are so grateful and proud of your leadership and your expertise. Oregon is very lucky to have you serving as our senator. And thank you for everything you do.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
See
And
you
for
down the road.
Sounds good. Bye, Senator. And for attendees, hang on for 1 minute. We have an announcement from our team about a way you can stay involved. So I'm going to pass it over to Charlotte Perry from our team for a next action.
Great. Thanks so much, Lindsay. And thank you again to Senator Merkley for taking the time to share all of these great updates with us today. I just want to take a quick moment to talk about what comes next while we have you all here. So to keep the momentum going for campaigns like permanent protection of the Owyhee Canyon lands and to continue raising awareness about IRA implementation, conservation, and the other critically important environmental issues that we discussed this afternoon, we need help from everybody here. The most impactful step that all of you can take to support progress on any of the topics we covered today is submitting a letter to the editor, to either your local newspaper and or the Oregonian. For the uninitiated, LTEs, as we call them in the business, are brief opinion articles, typically around 200 to 300 words, which are written by community members such as yourselves to communicate with your peers and neighbors about current events, local issues, or legislation that you think is important. They serve a very essential community education function and are a vital part of a diverse and democratic information space. A lot of the population gets their news from online and print newspapers, so a letter to the editor is a great way to share your thoughts and opinions on the issues you care most about and get the folks around you engaged. OLCV has toolkits and talking points that I believe Gordon just dropped in the chat for anyone who is interested, and our organizing staff, including myself, Brittany, Sam, and Gordon, are all available to offer support with proofreading, editing, answering questions, anything that you might need on your LTE journey. We are happy to help, so please don't hesitate to reach out. And then one more quick flag before we hop off. I wanted to take a moment to invite you all to an upcoming agriculture roundtable with Friends of Family Farmers, Pacoon, and Congresswoman Andrea Salinas of Oregon's 6th Congressional District. Given the really impressive investments in climate smart agriculture that we've seen made via the IRA and the BIL, a strong farm bill is a major national priority and one that is very much under threat in the face of growing dysfunction in the US House and increasing calls for cuts to climate programs. So I would be thrilled if y'all would join us on Thursday, November 2nd from 12 to 1:15 p.m. for a conversation about the outlook of the Farm Bill and how we can support state level efforts to ensure Oregon's farmers and agricultural producers have everything they need for the years to come. Just want to close up by saying thank you again to Senator Merkley and his staff, as well as the rest of the OLCV team for helping make this town hall a success. And thank you again to everybody in the audience today for being here with us. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we hope to see you again sometime soon.
Thank you all.